Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling, Do Leftists Want to Democratize, Restructure Liberalism or Oppose and Overthrow it? So this is a big picture question that is actually relevant to people who even don't consider themselves leftists, and also to people who do and have particular ideologies within it, for instance, who consider themselves to be democratic socialists or communists, and or Marxists, and or anarchists for that matter. Anyway, this is a big picture question, because the theory of leftism, which is Marx is probably the most systematic thinker in the left-wing political economic social science tradition, posited in a way that different modes of production replace one another. So a mode of production in Marx's view was the whole way a society really was structured. And a political economy is a better general word for that. And so the political economy of feudalism in his model gave way to the political economy of capitalism, within which included what we call liberalism, in other words, small l liberalism, and not liberalism in the very inclusive sense of a society, a political state that is founded on the principle of individual liberty, individual property ownership, and also that individuals can have. They often have representatives in government, so democracy is associated with that, and the representatives are, loaned the political sovereignty or popular sovereignty that stems from the populace as a whole, the group of people, the citizenship as a whole, and so the citizens form the basis of that democracy, and it's a republican, a democratic republic is the expression of liberalism that has come to be most closely associated with it. And of course there are different variations of that. In reality, there are constitutional monarchies where the monarch is simply a figurehead, and even though nominally sovereign, but actually not really sovereign. So sovereignty originates in the people overall as a collectivity. So that system. So anyway, Marx thought that the capitalist mode of production would give way to socialism and then communism. So it would be a change, or at least that he thought it was going to be automatic. At the same time, his political theory was a little bit all over the place, or was very underdeveloped. And anyway, and even though many people don't consider themselves to be Marxist, and many socialists and many leftists don't consider themselves to be Marxist, there is an inheritance from Marx in terms of how you think of yourself and as or what do you think as being good, or being left, or being left in the leftist tradition is among leftists is considered to be essentially more ethically righteous in a way, if one is more in tune with it, if one is more trying to push society forward toward socialism or communism, and therefore one should strive to be that. Anyway, in reality, what's happened is that there is a bifurcation in the socialist slash maybe you could call it Marxist tradition, but anyway, Marx-inspired socialist tradition and leftist tradition overall. So these words they overlap in different ways. They're not all, it's hard to, leftism is probably the biggest umbrella that we have for this particular grouping. And but anyway, this bifurcation is in my title here, where essentially we've had the social democratic tradition, which is also socialist, okay, or many people individually identify themselves as socialists within social democracy. But in essence, what social democracy is that you use the state to reform capitalist societies that are small L liberalism, based on the ideas of that one uses legal structures. They change the legal structures of the society through a democratic process. You pass different laws, and laws that favor working people more than capital, or more than the rich. That you create a more egalitarian society through a legislative incremental process. And I believe that tradition doesn't have sufficient self-consciousness and self-awareness to speak of it in the terms that I'm speaking of today. Not to say that this presentation is couldn't be improved in some way or another, but anyway, but I think that to understand it in reference to liberalism, the liberal tradition is actually enlightening and helpful, because what democratic socialists or social democrats, and also, so the word democratic socialist is in a way a more ambitious idea that is really, at least in the United States, where the word is used most often, it is a form of social democracy. In other words, that the idea, the proposals in terms of action, in terms of what should happen, involve the legislation of new, or the proposal and then the legislation of new laws, the enforcement of those laws that create a more egalitarian society, that has a tax structure that creates a more equality, while not often fundamentally challenging, and this is where there's a gray area, challenging the control of the means of production by private ownership. In other words, by capitalists or corporations that are represent the interest of private investors and their leadership and so forth and so on. So and of course there are laws in the ideal social democracy, and this is where it's been, I think, insufficiently, even if one subscribes to that tradition, insufficiently thought through, but yes, that there are constraints placed on those corporations. They can't exploit their property, their ownership of the means of production in the way that maybe they want to, because there are laws that say that we're protecting workers, we're protecting the environment, so forth and so on, by proposing and enforcing laws, for instance, a carbon tax now in our, or changing, requiring in corporate governance, requiring worker representation on corporate boards, which some social democratic societies require. So, or creating laws that make it easier to form a trade union, and also requiring, for instance, that representatives of the union even sit on boards, or at least representatives of the workers sit on, again, boards of corporations. So, and also laws that make it easier for workers to purchase entirely the means of production and to manage it, collectively, or management based on a council, a workers' council for that company. but anyway, so that route is one route, and then the other route is one where you overthrow, you have a revolution and you overthrow the liberal capitalist order. Now, when I use the word liberal, there could be reactionaries that are in government who are not quote unquote liberals in the sense of the way we talk about it in the United States, and also in Europe it's less clear. What we talk about, when we talk in the United States using the word liberal, it's often meant to mean also having certain views that are libertarian in the sense of not property owning, but libertarian in the sense of everybody is allowed to do what they want, and that be feeling positive about a change in cultural mores, and not restricting those, or in terms of sexuality, or in terms of gender identity, or in terms of a variety of cultures living in the same nation, a sort of a multicultural perspective or multi-ethnic perspective to the polity as a whole. So that is both that is both liberal in the European sense, or in the general sense, in the overall sense, and then also liberal in the sense of the way Americans think of it when they use the word liberal as a political orientation that's left of center. But most of the political spectrum in most of the developed countries are quote unquote small l liberal, in the sense of the belief in a society that is based on individual rights, and on among which are rights to property and rights to free speech, and also that there is a government that's supposed to represent the collectivity of those individuals, propose laws and so forth and so on, that are supposed to protect those rights. And anyway, so the second tradition within the left then is those that say, well, no, we need to overthrow capitalism and overthrow the liberal order to create something better, that is the socialist order. And so, and then that is in some sense even vaguer than, or it's not so vague in the sense of, if you turn to Lenin and you turn to MarxismLeninism, they basically are saying we don't need the liberalism anymore. We don't need to go through that stage of having a society based on those rights, of the rights of the individual. We can go directly to collective rights and create a better society than that exists in capitalist societies. And in reality, what's happened is that those societies in general have become more oppressive, and or at least they don't create an example of what people in when they are not in absolute dire straits in terms of their because of being serfs, because of being very landless peasants, because of being extremely hyper exploited, and starving in some form or another. When people start to sort of think about choices about how they want to live their lives, those societies in generally have showed themselves to be poor examples for the societies which didn't base their political systems on a liberal idea about individual rights and freedoms. And so some of those societies, they still are run by communist governments like Vietnam and China, but they decided to bring in some aspects of that into their societies, not in their political systems, so as not to challenge the political monopoly of the communist parties, but it tried to bring in the market side, the side of individual property ownership, and limited limited freedoms of expression that have to do with non-political items. So in other words, consumerist freedoms of expression, that you could dress as you like, you could follow certain trends, again, within limits. And so, and all, as in all societies, but in any case, that tradition has said, no, the first move is to overthrow or to oppose or to criticize, to make fun of all those things, liberalism, and to say, we don't need that tradition. We don't need, and then maybe later on they discover, well, we want certain parts of it, but we don't want the political part of it. Okay, we don't want the individual rights and the electoral politics, the transfer of power from one political grouping to another, and because the society is controlled centrally by one political party, that in the case of Vietnam and in China was the one that was the political military entity that kicked out the representatives of the capitalists in various points of their history. So anyway, the reason why, and this is why this is relevant and important right now, is that we are facing, in the war in Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Russia is not communist, but was communist, and Ukraine was also communist, was part of the Soviet Union. We are looking at societies that have divergent development trajectories, and the divergence has a lot to do with exactly liberalism. Okay, so in other words, Russia, while briefly an attempt was made in the 1990s to bring in a liberal style of democracy, again, extremely poorly managed and mostly weighted toward the neoliberal, belief in markets as, in some sense, being the holy grail of a free society, and that created a disaster. Okay, so neoliberalism, which is a part of liberalism as well, has only focused on, or almost exclusively focused on, the market and the freedom to own property and trade property and to commerce as being the key engine to development and to human liberation. And that was contrasted with the social democracies. Friedrich von Hayek was one of the progenitors of neoliberalism. Thought that he could overthrow, in some sense, the social democracies that were emerging in middle 20th century Europe with his ideas about neoliberalism, that somehow there was markets would create this spontaneous order which would be much more beneficial for people than the sort of the semi-planned economies and of social democratic Europe in the mid 20th century, and also in the United States, the New Deal, infrastructure, social welfare system that was guaranteed in part by government. And so anyway, so we have in the war, where we have Russia now invading Ukraine, we have the illiberal. So after its brief effort to become something like a liberal democracy, again, extremely corrupt, biased toward, in some sense, remote controlled in a way by the U.S. to some degree, and poor and creating enormous, killing millions by a couple million Russians by starvation, among other things, and or just poverty in different forms. It created a reaction to that in the form of in Putin's solution to that, which was to return to a more illiberal or a more autocratic system where he would be the central control person, along with the oligarchs or the ultra rich people who had basically had swept up some of the assets of the Soviet state, which was all owned by the Soviet government, and then and privatized. He created this sort of junta, or you could say, but really it's become simply a single person dictatorship with some appearance of being a democracy. So there are still elections and so forth and so on in Russia, and there is a parliament, but orchestrated all within the confines of what Vladimir Putin will allow. Anyway, and so he hasn't played games, though, even though there is the sort of the appearance of a democratic system in Russia. He has adopted in some of his rhetoric and some of his the kind of the Marxist. He was a former communist official. Some of the Marxist disdain for liberalism and the sense that he, even though he is not a progressive in any way, in other words, Putin doesn't think he represents something that is better than, or he does, but he doesn't think it's really better. It's not an example for the world. He's not trying to spread his ideology other than how it helps him and helps his government. He doesn't have a portable ideology that can be transplanted to other countries and transplanted to other, let's say, empires. Because anyway, he is basically rebuilding a Tsarist Russian empire, sort of, so with its Soviet version in between, and or at least as it suits him. He's not. I don't know how ambitious he is, how much he wants to ambitious for himself, in the sense of trying to turn his country into a complete garrison state, which is only about conquest and only about expanding the Russia, more that he's maybe just trying to recover the sphere of influence that he feels like he's lost, or that was lost in the process of the last 30 years or so of or 40 years of history, and creating a buffer for him and for Russia to remain in his power, remain in his under his domination. And so anyway, we have in this interface then, and in the form of Zelensky, we have a kind of a liberal hero, okay, someone who is trying, and again, maybe a neoliberal hero too. In other words, so I'm not necessarily 100% endorsing Zelensky as a political example that should be transported to other countries, though he appears to be a heroic individual. So he certainly has admirable individual characteristics. So, but he has evoked in many people the realization, I think, that being a very consistent and even self-sacrificing small L liberal, not necessarily, I guess, again, in the American sense of someone who has liberal left ideas about social mores and or culture war issues, let's say, so forth and so on, but is simply someone who believes in rule of law and believes in individual rights, so forth and so on, that is in the interface with someone like Putin, he's far preferable for many people, certainly who have themselves lived in countries that have gone through the liberal transformations in their society, where they enjoy individual rights, where they enjoy freedom of speech, and among other things, and freedom of movement, and they feel an identification with him, and also he's a small country. His country is being invaded by another country, so he is the victim, and there is a certain moral authority to being, or his country is being victimized, even though there are discourses that attempt to reverse this, and Putin himself tries to reverse like who is a victim and who is a perpetrator. So anyway, so this we see then revealed to us a missing step, I think, in much of how the left, at least, has thought about where liberalism is, and in some sense also the rights of freedom of expression and freedom of movement that many on the left value, but nevertheless haven't integrated into their politics and integrated into they haven't necessarily fought against it, but they haven't theorized it, and they haven't put it into a framework where they say, no, being a leftist means we're trying to democratize and restructure liberalism, okay? So if you set out to do that, you go through the laws of your country and you systematically decide, I'm kind of going to democratize this law, I'm going to do that to that law, I'm going to enforce these laws this way, I'm going to do this program because of, and sometimes often, governments come into power not with the idea that they're going to revise a bunch of different laws, but there's a crisis of some kind. In this case, we have enormous crises on our hands. So I am a great advocate for addressing those crises, including creating a democratically but state of emergency regarding the climate, and having a climate emergency that allows governments to spend freely and also restructure the energy systems of our and the transport systems of our societies, so they don't use the damaging fossil fuels that are going to make us extinct if we don't act quickly. So. But anyway, even with those emergency circumstances that need to be addressed immediately, it helps to think in general terms about what political framework you prefer, and also to have a project even because a lot of what's happening now in American politics too, not just in Europe, we have a right wing that is de-democratizing the United States and trying to create an autocracy or a minoritarian system where they manage democracy, they manage the appearance of democracy in favor of a group of basically a white minority, and that is also pro-capitalist, and is not to say that the other side isn't also pro-capitalist, but that is trying to create this ethno-state that is also promoting the interests of big business, within the confines of their ideology and their political the political wishes of their base. So we have a need in the United States to also embrace, and we find ourselves embracing things like rule of law and stuff, which is a very basic tenet of a small L liberal system. And anyway, so I think that it would help democratic socialists and social democrats to think clearly about, are we restructuring liberalism or are we trying to overthrow it? Because literally, because there are also individuals, by the way, who stand in the way of social progress, who call themselves liberals, okay, who I think are largely my opponents. Not always, not on every issue, but there is an unpleasant, and I will talk in another video about this, an unpleasant grandiosity and moral narcissism associated with liberalism that also leads to imperialism and leads to a blindness to the excesses of capitalism. So saying one is going to democratize and restructure liberalism doesn't mean you're endorsing the application of liberalism as it's existed in our current society or in other societies, completely. You may be thinking that 15 or 20% of it is good, 40, 50%, any number. And also it means that when you look at other societies, and if you're being an anti-imperialist or being a pro-democratic development, a pro-egalitarian person who is about promoting the equal, sustainable development of all countries in the world, that you allow those countries as well to develop some of the liberties that you've already achieved by the dint of having been born in a different country, or having moved to and then now live in a different country. So so to be able to look at that as well. But anyway, so this is a very complicated topic, and it will raise hackles in some people, and I hope to maybe argue with people about this, and if they have a difference of opinion with what I'm saying. And I don't think it's what I'm saying is 100% original, but it's reframing certain things, and also it's paying attention to I think the practical tasks that have to do with what are you going to propose in the way of a platform, and then laws and so forth and so on in your own country. Who are your natural allies in other countries, and also what do you think is what might be a good society overall? And again, with the proviso that we don't know 100% what the best society is and will be, and so that we should be open to new proposals. So anyway, so this is a long, maybe an introduction to a topic that I will need to return to, and I will return to in different videos, but I just wanted to share these thoughts with you. So please, comment below, and also if you like this presentation or just got anything out of this video, please like it, and also please subscribe to Politics 2100 if you are getting something out of the videos overall. And I'll see you in the next video.